if I told you that fulfillment is your birthright? See some heads nodding. I first came upon this phrase, fulfillment is your birthright. It was back in 2012, and I had just walked into a room for some coach training. I was just in the midst of starting my business, and I realized coaching was something that I really wanted to do. I'd kind of been doing it for a while, but not officially. And I thought, well, if I'm going to make this a part of my business, I need a credential. Can you relate? I need a credential. I need some training. So I'd gone to get some training, and I walked into the room that morning of that hotel where our class was about to start. And I walked up to the coffee bar, as we do in the morning, right? And above that coffee bar was this banner that said, or read, "Fulfillment is your birthright." Just pouring my coffee, just letting it sink in, taking a sip. And I stood staring at that for a while, just wondering what that really meant. Because honestly, just that word fulfillment, I hadn't really thought about that much, that word, what it meant. But I was taking it in. And a few minutes later, we would gather. It was a circle of chairs for the coaching program to begin. And I took my seat among about 15 other people that morning who would become my colleagues and close friends over the next year as we went through this path together. And in a moment or two, our leaders began, and one of them asked us this question that unraveled me. And the question was, what are you longing for? And I thought about that. And I was looking around the circle, and I thought, they just asked us to consider it for a few minutes individually, and I was taking it in. I'm like, I don't really think I'm longing for anything. I was in the midst of my business startup. It was going great. I was pouring all of myself into it. It was consuming me. I was allowing it to consume me. I loved this work. I was married to a wonderful man, Chuck. We had a wonderful son, Luke. Luke in the house. We had this wonderful son, our precious little family, surrounded by friends, family support. I didn't think I was longing for anything. And as I looked around that circle, I thought, maybe y'all are longing for something. Maybe you need some support, but I'm good. I got it here. You ever do that? It's you, not me. Yeah. You can relate. So I thought that, and then they posed some other questions to us as well, and I was kind of struggling with all of it, to be honest, because I thought I'd come to get some coach training, and then I was like, oh boy, this is going to be more than that. Okay. So I promised myself that I would be open. That's really the first step I took. I thought, I'm just going to open myself to this and see what happens, right? And I'm glad I did. The rest of that weekend was amazing. We went through things like, what's most important to you? What are your core values? Some of you know what I'm talking about here. Life purpose. Any of you ever think about your life purpose? They had us thinking about that, and they had us coming up with a life purpose statement. I'd never done that before. I had helped organizations do this a lot. Your mission statement, your purpose statement, but never myself. But I did. And then they had us tapping into our inner wise woman self. Woman for me, your inner wise self. And really listening to that voice. What's that voice telling you? All this stuff, I'd never done this before. Slowing it down, reflecting, turning inward, and I realized that this was going to be starting this inward journey. And what happened to me that weekend is, in that silence, in turning in taking some time for myself, in many parts of my life, I was happy. I was fulfilled. But what I began to see was something that I had known for quite some time. I had this truth that was inside me that was only known to myself. And that truth was that, I felt like I was gay. But I'd never even allowed myself to own that, much less share that with anyone else. And so what began tapping on my shoulder, what began really rising up from within, was that knowing. And it was as if to go, what are you going to do with this? Because it's real and it's who I am. And, what are you going to do with that? And so I started thinking about that. And I didn't feel like I could live it. I didn't feel like I could live it and be who I am for so many reasons. One of the main reasons had to do with my upbringing. I grew up in a family that was very loving and supportive and nurturing and kind, and I loved my family. But they were also very conservative in their viewpoints and their thinking, and I knew what my family had said my whole life about people who were gay. It's a sickness. It's not right. It's immoral. It's sinful. Who wants to be gay, right? All of that coming at me, so it was never even an option. So when that began rising up with me, in me, in the middle of my life, first time I was even aware of that was in my 30s. And I think one of the reasons why it took me so long was that kind of upbringing. And here I am in the middle of my life, so whenever that feeling would rise up, I would just push it down because I can't, I have this wonderful marriage, this amazing family. I can't leave them. I can't hurt them. And my mind would reason, are you sure? How do you know? You're going to leave this for a maybe? You're going to live yourself, your true self. How do you know, right? Yeah, and so I pushed that down until this weekend. That weekend when I walked into the room and I really started to think about fulfillment. So I'm going to fast forward. So go with me. 4 years later. 4 years later, it's December of 2016. And I'm in my office, in my condo, my new condo. In fact, you can see it out the front window here. John and Joanne. They live there. Yeah. So I was in that office, and I remember sitting there, and I felt free for the first time in my life. I was 47. I had never felt so free. And I sat there thinking about how interesting it is, this intersection between knowing and living your truth. And I remember thinking about the difference of that. What is it to know your truth, to know who you are, and then to live it, right? You could know it and never choose to live it, right? So I had known this about myself for quite some time, but I hadn't chosen to live it until then. And so as I sat there in my office that day, I had just left my marriage of over 25 years, the hardest thing I ever did. That's what I told myself. Actually, the hardest thing that I ever did was not living my true self. But undoing that life was really hard, really difficult. And so I started that process of really thinking, knowing and living. It's one thing to know your truth. It's another thing entirely to live it, right? And so here I was, on this edge of doing that. And one of the first things I thought of is what took me so long. I'm 47. What's took me so long to know who I am to live it? And so I started unpacking that. Hang on one second. I'm getting a little water. So I started unpacking that. And there are two things that I want to share with you. I could share so many things, but there are two main things I want to share with you about that. One has to do with identity, and I'm going to call it fabricated identities or identity. The second one has to do with choosing me. Choosing me. And along with that, selfish and self-full. I'm going to come back to that. First, fabricated identity. So as I sat there in my office in my new condo, 47, wondering about this, it took me back to my upbringing. And I said just a few moments ago, I had a great childhood in so many ways. But it took me back to my upbringing, and it had me thinking about how people around us, especially our parents, they shape this identity for us before we're ever even born. Some of you in this room are parents. I'm a parent. And the funny thing was, my parents did this for me. Oh, it's a girl. We'll paint her room pink. Maybe she'll be a little ballerina. I never was. But, right, we start hoping and dreaming and planning and thinking about what this little life is going to be. I did it to my own son. He and his dad and I, when I was pregnant with Luke, and I found out it was going to be a boy, I was like, oh, it's a boy. Wow. Oh, well, give him a strong name. Lucas. You know? Maybe he'll play football or baseball. And then his grandparents added on more love. They said, oh, he's so smart. He wasn't even born yet. He's so smart. Maybe he'll be an engineer like his dad. I was like, yeah. Right? So this is what we do. It happened to us. We do it to our kids. It's like this little costume is hanging in the closet, all ready for you when you're born, and you're born and you just wiggle right into that costume, and you start living that identity that your loved ones, your parents, your siblings, and so forth have shaped for you. You don't even know the difference. You just start doing it. I did it. I mean, and it's okay. For me, there was a lot of love there. But my point with this, over 20 years, I lived into this identity, and even into my 20s, that really didn't feel like my own entirely. It did some, but not entirely. And as I moved into my 20s and 30s, I started to really craft and shape my own identity. I feel like I'm kind of a late bloomer. Like, that didn't happen for me in my late teens and early 20s. It happened, push it a little later, a few years later, and that's okay. That was my journey. Yeah, so that idea of fabricated identities versus your true identity. And so I began coming to terms with that, and I began thinking about the values, the beliefs, the norms that were shaped for me over my life, and how I kind of flowed into living that. And then I began to question and challenge the things that I couldn't do as a teen. I didn't feel like I could do that. My family was very strict, straight-laced, I call it. And I couldn't really explore that until I did. And when I did, I began to learn things about myself and claim and acknowledge things about myself. The second thing I want to share is about this idea of selfish and self-full, about choosing yourself. So I don't know about how you grew up, but you might be able to relate to this. My mom did not teach me to be about myself. She taught me to be about others. Sounds like a good and noble thing. I bet a lot of you might feel that way. I was a member of Rotary for a long time. Service above self. Any Rotarians in the room, or have you been, right? Service above self. So being about others. It can be a good thing, but it can also be to your detriment if you allow it to, you can lose yourself in that. And selfish in my home growing up was a dirty word. Don't be so selfish. Anybody ever tell you that? Don't be so selfish to your brother, your sister, How could you think just of yourself? I was taught by my parents to be seen and not heard. Don't speak until spoken to. Act ladylike, whatever that means to you, right? And so what happened was it shaped this mild, meek, timid, rules-following kid. My friends now probably say, who's that? I don't know who that is. Yeah, my pushback on that rebellion came a little later. when I met all of you. You taught me different things. You contributed to shaping the identity that felt more like my own. Yeah, so selfish. So I want to offer this a little bit of a reframe on that word. So instead of selfish, I want you to think about self-full. We attach so much to words. So selfish has all this negative connotation for me. So self-full I like it better. And it's about the idea of filling yourself up so you can be better for yourself first. Be strong in yourself so you can be the best self for others and other things in your life. It's like when you board an airplane and the attendant says, put your oxygen mask on first before assisting other people. Same thing. So what I've learned about this is my journey. Choosing Me is a memoir, and I want you to know it's not really about me. I am sharing my story. It was hard for me to do that. It was very vulnerable to do that. If you've read it, you're probably like, yeah, that was really tough, I'm sure. I interviewed over 50 women for this book project, to inform my writing. I've coached hundreds of women over the years. And what I know is that we share a common journey. We share common themes, universal themes, I believe. The whole purpose of this book is to inspire others to not wait. You know, wherever you are and whatever is calling to you, just take the first step. And once you take the first step, you'll know the next step to take. And so that's my wish. That's my hope tonight that you're walking away with. It's not just my story. I want to share, stories of others, and it's about your story and living that in the world.